It was a Saturday afternoon, and the sun was warm against my skin as I strolled hand in hand with Emily through the bustling streets of downtown. The city was alive with the sounds of laughter, distant music, and the hum of passing cars. Weekends like this were rare for us. Days when we could just relax and enjoy each other's company without the demands of work pulling us in different directions. I glanced at Emily, her bright smile lighting up her face as she talked about a new restaurant she wanted us to try later that evening. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. Despite the usual ups and downs, our marriage was strong, or so I thought. As we passed a small cafe, I noticed a man approaching us. He was tall, in his late 20s, with a confident swagger that set me on edge instantly. There was something about the way he looked at Emily that made my stomach tighten. Before I could react, he was standing in front of us, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Hey, aren't you?" he started, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place her face. Emily's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition in her eyes before she quickly masked it. "I think you've got the wrong person," she said, her voice tight. She tried to move us along, but the man was undeterred. "No way, it's definitely you," he insisted, pulling out his phone. "Can I get a picture with you? My friends won't believe this." I blinked in confusion, a wave of irritation washing over me. What the hell was this guy talking about? Why did he think he knew my wife? Emily's grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel her pulse quicken. She laughed nervously. "Sorry, I think you're mistaken." But the man wasn't backing down. "Come on, just one picture," he pleaded, stepping closer. And then he said it, his voice casual, almost like a joke. "You've got a nice ass, by the way." I froze. My vision went red as the words hung in the air, heavy and offensive. Who the hell did this guy think he was? "What the fuck did you just say?" I snapped, stepping protectively in front of Emily. My hands clenched into fists, ready to knock the smug grin off his face. Emily pulled on my arm, her voice suddenly loud and sharp. "That's enough! Let's go!" She turned away quickly, practically dragging me down the sidewalk. "Emily, what the hell was that about?" I demanded as we walked, the anger still boiling inside me. But she didn't answer, just kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, walking faster. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That guy had known her, I was sure of it. But why hadn't she acknowledged him? And why the hell did he feel comfortable saying something like that to her in front of me? The whole situation didn't make sense. By the time we got home, I was seething with frustration. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned to her, determined to get answers. "Emily, you need to tell me what just happened. Who was that guy and why did he talk to you like that?" She avoided my gaze, busying herself by taking off her shoes. "I don't know who he was, okay? Just some random creep." "Random creep? He knew you, Emily. And he said something completely out of line." My voice was rising, the tension between us thickening. "Why didn't you tell him to fuck off? Why did you let him talk to you like that?" She finally looked at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and something else. Fear, maybe? "I told you I don't know him. Just drop it, please." Her voice cracked slightly, and for a moment I softened. Maybe it really was nothing. Maybe I was blowing this out of proportion. But deep down, the doubts had already started to take root. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. Why was she so defensive? Why did she shut the conversation down so quickly? I decided to let it go for now, but my mind was already churning with questions. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, listening to her steady breathing, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I replayed the encounter in my head over and over again, dissecting every detail, every word. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would turn my world upside down. And as the shadows of doubt crept into my thoughts, I realized I was just starting to unravel the secrets my wife had been keeping. The days after the incident were tense. Every time I looked at Emily, I couldn't help but see that moment replay in my mind. The smirk on that guy's face, the way she had practically fled the scene. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that she was hiding something from me. But how could I confront her without sounding paranoid? I tried to go about my routine as usual, but everything felt off. I found myself watching her more closely, picking up on little things that I might have ignored before. The way she'd suddenly changed the subject when I asked about her day, or how she seemed a little too eager to leave for work in the morning. Emily had always been confident, self-assured, but now I was noticing cracks in that facade, moments where she seemed distracted, almost distant. It was a Thursday evening when things started to come to a head. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, the TV droning on in the background while she scrolled through her phone. I couldn't help but notice how quickly she'd close her apps whenever I glanced her way. "Who are you texting?" I asked casually, trying not to sound accusatory. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Just some friends from work. Nothing important." "Mind if I take a look?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted it. I wasn't this kind of guy, the suspicious, controlling type. But I couldn't help it. I needed to know if there was something going on. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "Seriously? You want to check my messages now?" I hesitated, feeling the tension rise between us. "No, it's just... I don't know, Emily. Things have been weird lately." She sighed, setting her phone down on the coffee table. "Weird how exactly? Because some jerk on the street made a comment?" "It's not just that," I insisted, struggling to put my feelings into words. "You've been different, more secretive. I feel like there's something you're not telling me." "Tom, you're imagining things." She stood up, clearly frustrated. "I'm tired, okay? I'm going to bed." I watched her walk away, a heavy feeling settling in my chest. I knew I was pushing her away, but I couldn't stop myself. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing rapidly, filling my thoughts with dark possibilities. Was I really imagining things? Or was there something more to this? The following day, Emily left early for work, barely saying goodbye. I spent the morning trying to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to her. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I started looking through her social media profiles. As I scrolled through her posts, everything seemed normal at first. Pictures of us together, outings with friends, harmless updates about her day. But then I noticed something strange. There were large gaps in her posting history, weeks where she didn't post anything at all. And during those times she had been more distant, more guarded. It was almost as if she was deliberately avoiding leaving any trace of what she was doing. I went further back, combing through the comments and likes, trying to find any clues. That's when I noticed a pattern, a few names that kept popping up in her posts and pictures. Some were people I recognized from her work, but others were unfamiliar, and they interacted with her far more than any casual acquaintance would. Who were these people? And why hadn't she mentioned them? My paranoia grew as I delved deeper into her online life. I started Googling the unfamiliar names, trying to piece together any connections, but every lead I followed seemed to go nowhere, just regular people with regular profiles. Still, the doubt gnawed at me. There had to be something more. That evening, when Emily came home, I tried to act normal, but the tension between us was palpable. She seemed distracted, barely paying attention to our conversation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. "Hey, do you remember that guy from last weekend?" I asked suddenly, my voice casual. "The one who approached us?" Emily froze for a moment before quickly recovering. "Yeah, what about him? Did you ever figure out who he was?" She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "No, and honestly, I don't care. It's not worth thinking about." I nodded, but her response only fueled my suspicions. Why was she so dismissive? Why didn't she seem more bothered by the whole encounter? That night, as Emily slept beside me, I found myself wide awake, my mind racing with questions. What if she was hiding something bigger than I realized? What if there was a reason that guy recognized her, a reason she didn't want to talk about? I knew I had to dig deeper, but I couldn't do it openly. Emily was already on edge, and if I pushed too hard, she might shut down completely. So I decided to take a different approach. I would start looking into things quietly, without raising her suspicions. If there was something going on, I needed to find out on my own terms. Over the next few days, I became more cautious, more deliberate in my actions. I started checking her phone when she was in the shower, looking for any signs of infidelity, texts, emails, anything. But everything seemed perfectly normal. There were no suspicious messages, no late-night calls. It was almost too perfect. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't find any concrete evidence, but the doubt was still there, gnawing at me like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. I started looking into other ways to find out what she might be hiding. Maybe it wasn't in her phone or on social media. Maybe it was something deeper, something she was keeping far away from my prying eyes. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself becoming more distant, more paranoid. Emily noticed, of course, but every time she asked what was wrong, I would brush it off, telling her I was just stressed from work. She seemed to accept it, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. The atmosphere in our home became increasingly tense, the once warm and loving environment now tinged with suspicion and unspoken questions. I was trapped in my own mind, searching for answers that I wasn't even sure existed. And then, one night, as I sat alone in the living room, Emily already asleep in bed, I decided to take a different approach. I opened my laptop and started searching through adult websites. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate attempt to find something, anything, that would explain what was going on. But even as I typed her name into the search bar, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. What was I doing? Was I really so paranoid that I was searching for my wife on porn sites? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I scrolled through the results, each click feeling like a stab in my chest. There was nothing at first, just random videos and profiles that didn't match her. But then, as I was about to give up, something caught my eye. A thumbnail with a woman who looked disturbingly like Emily. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked on it. The video loading slowly, as if mocking my desperation. And then, there she was, Emily. Or at least someone who looked exactly like her, in a compromising position with another man. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My stomach churned, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. Could it really be her? Was this what she had been hiding all along? But before I could make any conclusions, I forced myself to close the laptop, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I was spiraling, my mind racing with possibilities, but I knew I needed more proof before confronting her. I couldn't just accuse her without being absolutely sure. So, I resolved to keep looking, to dig deeper until I found the truth, no matter how painful it might be. In that moment, I knew my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. And as I lay awake in bed that night, the darkness around me seemed to mirror the growing darkness in my heart. The next few days were a blur. I could barely focus on anything other than the gnawing suspicion that had taken over my thoughts. At work, I was a mess, forgetting meetings, missing deadlines, and losing my temper over the smallest things. My colleagues noticed, but I brushed off their concerns, mumbling excuses about stress and lack of sleep. But the truth was, my entire world was unraveling, and I had no idea how to stop it. At home, things were worse. Emily and I barely spoke, and when we did, the conversations were strained, filled with awkward silences and forced pleasantries. I couldn't look at her without imagining that video, without hearing the voice of the man in it, the things he said to her. Every time she touched me, I felt a wave of revulsion mixed with guilt. How could I feel this way about the woman I loved? And yet I couldn't help it. I needed answers. One evening, after another tense dinner, I made up an excuse about needing to catch up on work and retreated to my office. My hands were shaking as I sat down at my computer, the same sick feeling in my stomach as when I had searched for her the first time. But this time, I was determined to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I started by searching through more adult websites, using every variation of her name, every possible keyword that might bring up something new. The hours passed in a haze of desperation, each click bringing up more videos, more images, some with women who looked like her, some with women who didn't. But nothing concrete, nothing that screamed, "This is Emily." It wasn't until late that night, when I was just about ready to give up, that I stumbled across a forum. It was a place where people discussed adult content, shared links, and talked about their favorite performers. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the threads, looking for anything that might lead me to her. And then, I saw it. A discussion about a woman with the same first name as my wife. The men in the forum were talking about her like they knew her, like they'd seen her in countless videos. My hands shook as I clicked on the thread, my eyes scanning the words, each one hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Did you see her latest video? She's incredible. I've been following her for months, She's got that girl next door look, but damn, she's wild. She's one of the best out there right now. Can't believe she's still doing this stuff. I felt like I was going to be sick. The way they talked about her, the things they said. I could barely breathe. And then I saw it. A link to her profile on one of the adult sites. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked on it, my breath catching in my throat. The page loaded slowly, as if mocking my anxiety. And then, there she was. Her face, her body. It was unmistakable. The woman in the videos, the one they were all talking about, it was Emily. My Emily. The woman I had married. The woman I had trusted with my life. And she was doing this, behind my back in secret, with other men. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The room spun around me as I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. How long had this been going on? How many videos had she made? How many men had she been with? And why? Why would she do this? Why wouldn't she tell me? I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing, my mind reeling. I needed air, needed to get out of the house. I stumbled out of my office, nearly tripping over my own feet as I made my way to the front door. I had to get away, had to clear my head. But as I reached for the door handle, I stopped. What if she saw me leave? What if she asked where I was going? I couldn't face her. Not now, not after what I'd just discovered. Instead, I turned and headed for the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to calm myself down. But nothing worked. The image of her in those videos was burned into my mind, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get rid of it. I stayed in the bathroom for what felt like hours, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to make sense of what I had just uncovered. But there was no making sense of it. My wife was a porn actress, and she had been hiding it from me for who knows how long. Eventually, I forced myself to leave the bathroom, the weight of the truth pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I made my way to the bedroom, where Emily was already asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I stood in the doorway, staring at her, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and betrayal. How could she do this to me? How could she lie to me, hide this from me? And worse, how could she do it with someone else? My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. But one thing was clear. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't pretend everything was okay when it was anything but. As I lay down next to her, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had discovered, I knew that my life would never be the same. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved and trusted, she was a stranger to me now. And as I closed my eyes, the tears finally came, silent and uncontrollable. The pain of her betrayal was too much to bear, and for the first time, I realized that the life we had built together was nothing more than a lie. The next morning, I woke up feeling numb, the events of the previous night still fresh in my mind. I couldn't look at Emily as she got ready for work, couldn't bring myself to say anything. She seemed to sense that something was wrong, but she didn't push me, didn't ask what was bothering me. Maybe she was afraid of what I might say. As soon as she left the house, I went back to my office, reopening the laptop and staring at her profile on the adult site. There were dozens of videos, each one more explicit than the last, each one confirming the painful truth. I spent hours watching them, torturing myself with every frame, every scene. I needed to know how deep her betrayal went, how long she had been living this double life. But the more I watched, the angrier I became. Not just at her, but at myself. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I had trusted her, believed in her, and she had shattered that trust without a second thought. By the time Emily came home that evening, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay with her, couldn't live with the constant reminder of what she had done. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it either. If she thought she could lie to me, cheat on me, and go on with her life like nothing had happened, she was wrong. I was going to ruin her. I was going to make sure she lost everything. Her career, her reputation, everything she had built with her lies. She had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn to take everything from her. As she walked through the door, her smile fading as she saw the look on my face, I knew there was no going back. The Emily I had loved was gone, and in her place was a woman I didn't recognize. A liar, a cheater, a stranger. And she was about to find out just how much damage a broken man could do. The tension in the house was palpable as Emily stepped through the door, her eyes immediately locking onto mine. I stood in the living room, waiting for her, my mind a chaotic storm of anger and betrayal. She hesitated, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, her smile faltering as she set her purse down. "Tom, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tentative, as if she already knew the answer. I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to play it cool. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them if I lost control now. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "There's something I need to know, and I want you to be completely honest with me." She blinked, her eyes widening slightly. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I gestured to the couch, motioning for her to sit down. "I've been doing some thinking, Emily. About us, about our relationship. And I've noticed some things that don't add up." She sat down slowly, her expression guarded. "What things?" "Like last weekend, when that guy approached you on the street. He knew you, Emily. He recognized you, and he said some pretty inappropriate things. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it's been bothering me ever since." Emily's face flushed, and she quickly looked away. "I told you he was just some creep. I don't know why he thought he knew me." "That's what you said," I replied, my voice hardening. "But then I started noticing other things. You've been distant, secretive. You're always on your phone, but you never talk about who you're texting. You disappear for hours without telling me where you've been. And then there are the gaps in your social media, the times when you just vanish." Her eyes flicked back to mine, a flash of panic crossing her face. "Tom, Let me finish," I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. "I've been doing some digging, Emily. I needed to know what you were hiding from me, so I looked into it, and I found something." Her breath caught, and she stared at me, frozen. "What did you find?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the browser to the page I had saved earlier, the profile I had discovered on the adult site. I turned the screen toward her, watching as her face went pale. "This," I said, my voice cold. "This is what I found." Emily's eyes widened as she stared at the screen, her hands trembling. For a moment, she looked like she might faint, but then she snapped out of it, her expression shifting from fear to defiance. "How did you—" she began, but I cut her off. "It doesn't matter how I found it," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "What matters is that you've been lying to me. You've been hiding this from me for who knows how long, and I want to know why. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you do it? And why the hell did you do it with someone else?" Emily's mouth opened and closed, as if she were searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Finally, she seemed to gather herself, her eyes narrowing as she met my gaze. "You have no right to go through my personal stuff," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Personal stuff?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think this is about privacy? You've been fucking other men on camera, Emily. You've been selling your body, and you didn't think I had the right to know?" Her face twisted in anger, and she stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand. You never would. This was my decision, my choice. I didn't need your permission." I felt like I'd been slapped. Her decision? Her choice? What about our marriage? What about the vows we made? "How could you do this to me?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How could you betray me like this?" Emily's expression softened slightly, but the defiance was still there, lurking beneath the surface. "I never meant to hurt you, Tom. This was something I needed to do for myself. It had nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me?" I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "How can you say that? You were supposed to be my wife, my partner. We were supposed to be a team, but instead you were out there, doing God knows what with God knows who, and you didn't even think I deserved to know." She looked away, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't understand. I knew you'd react like this." "Of course I wouldn't understand!" I shouted, my anger boiling over. "How could I? You've been lying to me, Emily. You've been living a double life, and you've been doing it behind my back." Her head snapped back up, and she glared at me, her eyes flashing with fury. "I didn't lie to you, Tom. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." "A difference?" I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "You can't seriously expect me to buy that bullshit. You kept this from me because you knew it was wrong. You knew it would destroy us." For a moment, Emily seemed to falter, her defiance wavering. But then she straightened, her jaw set in a stubborn line. "I did what I had to do, Tom. I did it for us, for our future. Don't you dare try to spin this as something noble," I spat, my hands shaking with rage. "You didn't do this for us. You did it for yourself. And now you've ruined everything." The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of our words hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the anger and hurt radiating off both of us, a toxic brew that threatened to consume everything we had built together. I wanted to keep shouting, to make her understand the depth of her betrayal, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't care. Not really. She was only sorry she got caught. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned away from her, running a hand through my hair as I tried to collect my thoughts, but all I could think about was how much I wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the pain she had caused me. "You know what, Emily?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could look me in the eyes every day and lie to me. I don't understand how you could go to bed with me every night knowing what you were doing. But I'm done trying to understand." She took a step toward me, her hand reaching out as if to touch me, but I recoiled, the anger flaring up again. "Don't," I warned, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't you fucking touch me." Her hand dropped to her side, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes, but it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. "I'm leaving," I said, turning on my heel and heading for the door. "And when I come back, I expect you to be gone. I don't care where you go or what you do, but I don't want to see you here when I return." "Tom, wait!" she called after me, but I was already out the door, slamming it shut behind me. The sound echoed through the quiet street as I stormed to my car, my chest heaving with rage and adrenaline. I needed to get away from her, needed to clear my head before I did something I'd regret. As I drove through the darkened streets, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My marriage was over. The life I had known was over. And all because of the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not to her, not to the life we had shared. She had destroyed everything, and now I had nothing left but the burning desire to make her pay for what she had done. And as I sped down the empty road, the streetlights blurring past, I made a vow to myself. I would ruin her. I would take everything from her, just as she had taken everything from me. And when I was done, she would be nothing but a memory, one that I would finally be able to forget. But first I had to figure out how. The days following our confrontation were a whirlwind of anger, pain, and planning. Emily was gone when I returned home that night, just as I'd demanded. The house felt eerily quiet without her, but the silence was a welcome relief, a chance to think clearly for the first time in weeks. I wandered through the empty rooms, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. She had shattered my life, and I was determined to make her feel the same pain. I knew I couldn't just lash out blindly. I needed a plan, something methodical, something that would hit her where it hurt the most. Her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed life. I spent hours each day researching, learning everything I could about the world she had secretly been a part of. I delved into the dark corners of the internet, reading forums, watching videos, and gathering information about the industry and its players. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I stumbled upon a piece of information that would become the cornerstone of my plan. I found out that Emily had signed an exclusive contract with a well-known adult production company, a deal that had made her one of their top performers. The contract was lucrative, but it also came with strict clauses about privacy, non-disclosure, and most importantly, reputation. Any scandal could void the contract, and the company would be quick to cut ties with anyone who became a liability. A smile crept onto my face as I realized the implications. If I could create a scandal, if I could expose her secret life in a way that would ruin her reputation, I could destroy her career, and I knew exactly how to do it. I spent the next few days gathering all the evidence I needed. I downloaded every video, every image, every piece of incriminating content that featured Emily. I cataloged them meticulously, organizing them into folders and creating backups, just in case. I also compiled a list of everyone I knew in her personal life, friends, family, colleagues, people who would be shocked and horrified to learn the truth about her. But I wasn't just going to expose her to the people she knew. I wanted to take it a step further. I wanted to make sure the entire world knew what she had done. I created anonymous accounts on various social media platforms, carefully crafting a persona that would be believable, someone who had stumbled upon her secret life and was outraged by it. I posted the evidence, linking it to her real identity, her social media profiles, her LinkedIn page. I wrote scathing comments, accusing her of lying, of living a double life, of deceiving everyone who had ever trusted her. The posts quickly gained traction, spreading like wildfire across the internet. People shared them, commented on them, and soon the story was picked up by gossip blogs and tabloid websites. Within days, Emily's name was everywhere, linked to the scandalous revelations I had orchestrated. Her social media accounts were flooded with hate messages, her reputation in tatters. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that Emily's contract with the production company was hanging by a thread, and I was going to make sure it snapped. I anonymously sent the most damning evidence directly to the company's executives, along with a detailed explanation of how Emily had violated the terms of her contract. I even hinted that there was more to come, more scandals that could surface if they didn't act quickly. It didn't take long for them to respond. A few days later, I saw the news on one of the adult industry forums. Emily's contract had been terminated. The company issued a statement, distancing themselves from her and citing a breach of contract as the reason for her dismissal. They didn't go into details, but the damage was done. Emily was out, her career in ruins. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I read the news. This was exactly what I had wanted, to take everything from her, just as she had taken everything from me. But the satisfaction was short-lived. As the days went on, I began to feel the weight of what I had done. The anger that had fueled my actions was starting to fade, replaced by a gnawing emptiness that I couldn't ignore. I started drinking more, trying to numb the pain. But it only made things worse. The house that had once been our home now felt like a prison, filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. I couldn't escape the thoughts of her, of what we had been before everything fell apart. And then, one night, as I sat alone in the dark, a bottle of whiskey in my hand, I got a message on my phone. It was from Emily. "We need to talk, please. Just one more time." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard from her since that night I'd kicked her out. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to leave her to deal with the mess I'd created. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had loved, couldn't resist the urge to hear her side of the story. Maybe she had something to say that would make sense of it all, something that would bring me the closure I desperately needed. I hesitated for a long time before finally typing out a response. "Fine. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. You know where." The next day dragged on, the hours stretching endlessly as I waited for the inevitable confrontation. I didn't know what to expect, but I steeled myself for the worst. By the time evening rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves, my anger and pain simmering just below the surface. At exactly 8 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I took a deep breath and opened it, revealing Emily standing on the doorstep. She looked different. Tired, worn down, a shadow of the confident woman she had once been. But there was still a fire in her eyes, a determination that told me she wasn't going to go down without a fight. "Tom," she said, her voice soft but steady. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting her in. The moment she crossed the threshold, the tension in the air was palpable. We stood in the living room, facing each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "I know what you've been doing," she began, her eyes locked on mine. "I know you're the one who exposed me, who ruined my career." I didn't flinch, didn't deny it. And I understand why," she continued, surprising me. "I hurt you, betrayed you. I lied to you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand why I did it." "Why?" I asked, my voice cold. "What could possibly justify what you did?" She took a deep breath, her eyes pleading. "It wasn't about the money, Tom. It wasn't about the thrill or the attention. It was about control. I felt like I had lost control of my life, of who I was. I needed to do something for myself, something that made me feel powerful, even if it was something you would never understand. Control? I repeated, incredulous. You had control. You had me. We had a life together. But you threw it all away for what? For some twisted sense of empowerment. I know it doesn't make sense, she admitted, her voice breaking. But at the time it felt like the only way. I didn't know how to talk to you, how to tell you what I was feeling. So I kept it to myself, and it spiraled out of control. I shook my head, the anger rising again. You could have talked to me, Emily. We could have worked through it together. But instead you lied to me. You cheated on me, and you destroyed everything we had. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked away, ashamed. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but please, Tom, don't let this be how it ends. We were so good together once. Can't we at least try to salvage something? Can't we find a way to move forward? I stared at her. The woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, and I realized that I didn't know her anymore. She was a stranger to me, someone who had hurt me in ways I never thought possible. And despite her pleas, despite the pain in her eyes, I knew that I could never forgive her. No, Emily, I said, my voice hard and final. There's nothing left to salvage. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. I'm done. The words hung in the air, final and unforgiving. Emily nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. She turned and walked toward the door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As she reached for the handle, she paused, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, Tom. I really am. And then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there in the silence, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had gotten my revenge, had destroyed her life just as she had destroyed mine. But as I stood alone in that empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something far more valuable, something I could never get back. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to move on, tried to rebuild my life. But the anger and bitterness lingered, a constant reminder of what had been taken from me. I had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow, meaningless. I had destroyed Emily, but in the process, I had destroyed a part of myself as well. And that was a wound that no amount of revenge could ever heal. In the weeks that followed our final confrontation, I tried to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. But no matter how hard I tried, everything felt empty, like I was just going through the motions. The satisfaction of ruining Emily's career had faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of loss and regret that I couldn't shake. The house that had once been our home was now nothing more than a hollow shell, filled with memories I wanted to forget but couldn't. I threw myself into work, hoping that the distractions of my job would keep the pain at bay. But even there, the reminders of what I had lost were everywhere. I saw couples holding hands, sharing private jokes, and it only served to deepen the ache in my chest. My coworkers noticed the change in me, the way I withdrew from social events, the way I avoided talking about anything personal. I could see the concern in their eyes, but I didn't care. I didn't want their pity. I just wanted to be left alone. At night, the loneliness was unbearable. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of Emily. I replayed our last conversation over and over again, questioning every word, every decision I had made. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to see if there was any way we could start over. But I knew it was impossible. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, I decided to go for a drive. I had no destination in mind, just a need to get away from the suffocating walls of the house. The streets were quiet, the lights from the shops and restaurants casting a soft glow on the pavement. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, sorrow, and regret. Eventually, I found myself on a familiar street, one I hadn't been down in years. It was the neighborhood where Emily and I had lived when we first got married, back when everything was still new and full of promise. The memories flooded back, overwhelming me with a bittersweet mix of nostalgia and pain. I parked the car and got out, walking slowly down the sidewalk, past the houses that had once been the backdrop of our early life together. I reached the small park where we used to go on weekends, where we'd sit on a bench and talk about our dreams for the future. The bench was still there, worn and weathered, but otherwise unchanged. I sat down staring at the spot where we'd spent so many happy hours. The memories were almost too much to bear. I could see us there, laughing, holding hands, making plans for a life that now seemed like a cruel joke. How had it all gone so wrong? How had we gone from being so in love to this, a twisted mess of lies, betrayal, and anger? As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to see an older man, maybe in his 70s, walking slowly toward me. He had a kind face, his eyes crinkling with a gentle smile as he approached. "Mind if I sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. I shrugged, not really caring one way or the other. "Sure." He lowered himself onto the bench with a small grunt, settling in next to me. For a few moments, we sat in silence, watching the world go by. "It's a nice evening," he said eventually, his voice warm and friendly. "Yeah," I replied, though I barely noticed the weather. The man glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "You could say that." He nodded, as if he understood more than I was saying. "Life has a way of throwing curveballs at us, doesn't it?" I chuckled bitterly. "You have no idea." He smiled softly. "Oh, I think I do. You know, I used to come to this park with my wife. We'd sit right here on this bench, just like you're doing now. Those were some of the best days of my life." I glanced at him, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. "Where is she now?" His smile faltered, and for a moment, a deep sadness clouded his eyes. "She passed away a few years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "Thank you," he replied, his voice quiet. "But I don't tell you that to make you feel sorry for me. I tell you because I want you to know something. Life is short, too short to waste on anger and regret. I know it's hard, especially when someone you love hurts you, but holding on to that pain, it'll eat you alive." I looked down at my hands, his words hitting closer to home than I cared to admit. "What if you can't let it go? What if it's all you have left?" The man was silent for a moment, as if considering his response. "I won't pretend to have all the answers," he said finally. "But I do know this. Holding on to anger won't bring you peace. It won't change what happened. The only thing it'll do is keep you from moving forward, from finding happiness again." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't want to cry in front of a stranger, but the weight of his words was too much. I had spent so much time obsessing over what Emily had done, so much time plotting my revenge, that I had lost sight of everything else. I had destroyed her, but in the process, I had destroyed myself too. The man reached out and patted my shoulder gently. "Whatever you're going through, just remember, it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to forgive, even if it's just yourself." I swallowed hard, nodding again. "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. He smiled kindly. "Take care of yourself, son. Life's too short to waste on anything else." With that, he got up and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, thinking about what he had said. Forgiveness, starting over. It seemed impossible, but maybe he was right. Maybe it was the only way to find peace. That night, I went home and sat in the dark, thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about Emily, about the woman I had loved and the stranger she had become. I thought about the life we had shared and the life we had lost. And I realized that I had a choice to make. I could continue down the path of anger and revenge, but where would it lead me? More pain, more emptiness. Or I could choose to let go, to try and find a way forward, even if it meant facing the hardest truth of all, that the life I had known was gone, and it was time to start over. The next day, I made a decision. I wouldn't reach out to Emily, but I wouldn't destroy her further either. I had done enough damage, and now it was time to let go. I deleted the evidence I had collected, wiped my computer clean of everything that connected me to her secret life. It was a small step, but it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The pain wouldn't disappear overnight, and the memories would always be there. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move on, to rebuild my life without the anger and bitterness that had consumed me. I took a deep breath, looking around the empty house one last time. It was time to say goodbye to the past and face whatever the future had in store for me. And as I walked out the door, I felt a sense of resolve that I hadn't felt in a long time. I was ready to start over. As the weeks turned into months, the intensity of my pain began to dull. The anger that had driven me to the brink of destruction gradually subsided, leaving behind a sense of exhaustion and emptiness. But within that emptiness, I found something unexpected, a chance to rebuild, to redefine who I was without the burden of the past weighing me down. I threw myself into new routines, focusing on the small, everyday tasks that had once seemed so insignificant. I started waking up early, going for long runs through the neighborhood, feeling the cool morning air clear my mind. I began cooking for myself, experimenting with recipes, finding solace in the simple act of creating something from scratch. The house, once a place of haunting memories, slowly transformed into a space where I could breathe, where I could begin to heal. But healing didn't mean forgetting. The memories of Emily, of our life together, lingered in the corners of my mind, surfacing at unexpected moments. I'd see something in a store window that reminded me of her, or catch a whiff of a familiar perfume that would transport me back to the days when we were happy, when everything seemed possible. It was during those moments that the pain would return, sharp and unforgiving, reminding me of what I had lost. Yet, with each passing day, the pain became more manageable, more distant. I found myself thinking about Emily less frequently, and when I did, it wasn't with the same raw intensity as before. I still felt the sting of betrayal, but it was tempered by a growing acceptance that what had happened couldn't be changed. I could either let it define me, or I could choose to move beyond it. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I hadn't thought about Emily in days. The realization hit me with a mix of surprise and relief. It was as if I had turned a corner, finally leaving behind the darkness that had clouded my life for so long. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We had drifted apart after college, our lives taking different paths. But the message was warm, inviting me to a small get-together he was hosting that weekend. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. For so long I had kept to myself, avoiding social situations, unwilling to face the questions and pitying looks from people who knew what had happened. But something in me shifted as I stared at the message. Maybe it was time to reconnect, to step back into the world, to start living again. I typed out a quick response, agreeing to go, and set the phone down. There was a nervous flutter in my stomach at the thought of being around people again, but there was also a flicker of something else. Hope. Maybe this was the first step toward rebuilding my life, toward finding a new normal. The day of the get-together arrived, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror, scrutinizing my reflection. I had lost weight since everything had happened, and there were dark circles under my eyes from the many sleepless nights. But there was also a sense of determination in my gaze, a quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. I was ready. The party was a small, casual affair, held at my friend's house in a quiet suburb. As I walked up the driveway, I could hear the sound of laughter and music drifting through the open windows. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable questions, and knocked on the door. My friend greeted me with a wide grin, pulling me into a bear hug. "Tom, it's been too long, man. I'm so glad you could make it." "Thanks for inviting me," I replied, returning the hug. "It's good to see you." He led me inside, introducing me to the other guests, a mix of familiar faces and new ones. I was nervous at first, unsure of how to navigate the conversations, but the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, and I soon found myself relaxing, enjoying the company. As the evening wore on, I found myself talking to a woman named Claire, a friend of one of the other guests. She was around my age, with bright blue eyes and a quick smile that put me at ease. We started with small talk, but as the conversation flowed, we found ourselves discussing deeper topics: life, relationships, the challenges we had faced. I didn't tell her everything about what had happened with Emily, but I shared enough for her to understand that I had been through a difficult time. She listened without judgment, her expression softening with empathy. "It sounds like you've been through a lot," she said, her voice gentle. "But it also sounds like you're coming out the other side. That takes a lot of strength." I shrugged, feeling a mix of gratitude and discomfort at her words. "I'm trying. Some days are better than others." She nodded, her gaze steady. "That's all you can do. Take it one day at a time. And remember, you don't have to go through it alone." There was something in the way she said it, something that made me feel like maybe I didn't have to. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of connection, of possibility. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward. As the night drew to a close, Claire and I exchanged numbers, promising to meet up for coffee sometime soon. I left the party with a lightness in my step that I hadn't felt in months, a sense of optimism that had been missing from my life for far too long. The days that followed were different. I still thought about Emily from time to time, but the thoughts didn't consume me like they once had. Instead, they served as a reminder of how far I had come, of the strength I had found within myself to keep going. Claire and I started meeting regularly, our friendship growing with each passing day. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people enjoying each other's company, finding comfort in the simple act of being together. And as we spent more time together, I realized that I was beginning to care for her, to see a future that I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the past would creep up on me, when the memories would threaten to pull me back into the darkness. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between, replaced by a growing sense of hope and possibility. One evening, as Claire and I walked through the park, the same park where I had once sat alone, lost in my grief, she turned to me with a soft smile. "Tom, I'm really glad we met." I looked at her, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in so long. "Me too, Claire, me too." We walked in silence for a while, the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden glow over everything. It was a new beginning, a chance to build something better, something stronger. And as we walked, hand in hand, I knew that I was finally ready to leave the past behind and embrace whatever the future had in store. Life would never be the same as it had been before Emily's betrayal, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was even for the best. Because in the end, I had found something more valuable than revenge or anger. I had found myself, and that was a beginning I could be proud of.